Welcome to Rich Your Soul, Brad Golphenee. It's great to have you join us today.
Great to be here. Thank you, Rocky.
And I am excited for our conversation. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Wow, that is a big question. I'll give you a short answer. So at one point in my life, our family went camping for 6 months. Took us out of school, and during that 6 month period, instead of money for allowance, I received a box of wooden matches. And what I would do around the campfire is I would just make these intricate designs with a box of matches and kind of where they'd all touch each other. I'd light one and it would set off this chain reaction, and I would just have a blast with it. And I'm not a pyromaniac, but that was my allowance for a part of my life, because I received a box of wooden matches instead of money. It's probably the first time you've ever heard that. And so to know me, I'm a mountain guy. I grew up in mountain communities, mainly ski resorts. I've lived in Aspen. I've lived in Whitefish, Montana. And because of the way I grew up and the environments that I grew up, I never really bothered much about money. I sold newspapers for extra money since I was 14 years old. I probably have worked literally since at least 13 or 14, straight through to right now. I'm 61. I haven't stopped. I worked all the way through college. And so my work ethic has always been, I need to generate, I need to earn, I need money. But I don't think I've ever, well, I shouldn't say ever, but it's not my personality to really worry about money. I always have what I need, and I can relax in that. There was a time when I lived out of a van and I had to collect cans to eat that night, and I said, I will never do that again. I had a job the next day. So I'm all over the board with money, but my parents didn't really teach me a whole lot about money. I think life did.
What about school?
I don't think school taught me anything about money. I think that, no, I don't think at all. I think that what really taught me about money was just my own level of comfort and survival. You know, I put myself through college. I worked 4 days a week all through college, paid my own rent, paid tuition. And even though that was a struggle and most of my friends didn't work while I was in college, so grateful that that was my experience. Truly. It shaped me for how I showed up the rest of my life.
A little bit of grit.
A little bit of grit, a lot of hustle, a lot of hustle. Yeah.
So, what's the story with this 6 month camping trip? Like, what was that all about?
Yeah, I see your curiosity bell going. So our family, before we moved to the mountains, lived in Southern California. I was a beach kid. And this is the late 60s, my parents said, Southern California is going to hell. We need out. They didn't know where they wanted to go, but they knew they wanted to go to the mountains. So they grabbed myself and my little brother, pulled us out of school, and we literally traveled around the West for 6 months and checked out mountain communities. That's when we found Aspen, Colorado. We found a lot of great places during that 6 months. And it was fabulous. It was actually a very memorable time for me, just having our family all living in a camper and going from place to place and exploring. It was really great.
How old were you then?
I was 8.
Okay, so still relatively young.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you like to play with matches.
Well, not anymore, but I do set lots of fires because I have property. I have a small ranch here in Idaho, and I have an excavator, and I get some big burn piles built up in the spring. So I do like my fires, I guess. I never really connected those two, but maybe there's a connection.
Well, it's funny, though, because as kids, we had matches. Today, people would probably freak out over that, right? You're going to burn yourself or do whatever. And it's kind of funny because I'm in another men's group. We'll talk about men's groups. And someone had posted something about, kids being able to do stuff. I'm like, yeah, like carry knives and have fun. And he was just like, hey, this is what used to be for boys. And today I think we freak out a little too much over that. And
yeah,
same thing for lighting a fire as an 8-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It was easy for my parents to give that as an allowance, right? It was useful, and honestly, back then money wasn't useful for me while we were camping. It's like, what
You
am I going to
couldn't
do with
do
this?
anything.
Right?
So true. So you go to college. Did you go for what you do now, or
No, 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 no. Here's the summary version of me. So I consider myself growing up literally on ski hills since I was about 9 years old, right? And skiing was a big part of my life. So was snowboarding. And so I went to the University of Denver because Denver was the furthest I had ever lived from skiing. And I didn't want to get too close because I knew I would never go to class. So I went to the University of Denver, had a great experience, and actually had a number of businesses while I was in college on campus. So my first business was immediately out of the gate. My freshman year, I learned that DU had a lot of kids from the East Coast that had great equipment and didn't know how to take care of it. I'm an old racer, so I know how to tune skis. So I opened up a ski tuning shop and I tuned people's skis on campus. And then I later became a snowboard rep on campus. So I was a snowboard dealer and sold snowboards. And actually, my junior year in college, I was in marketing class and they were talking about what makes the perfect product. It was just kind of this bullet list. And in snowboarding, there was a law or a rule back in Colorado that you had to have a retention device on your snowboard. Ski brakes wouldn't work for a snowboard, so it had to be a snowboard leash, which is just a strap that is designed in a certain way. And so my junior year in college, I started manufacturing snowboard straps, and that business actually stayed with me for 30 years. No joke. Yeah.
they don't
I
require that anymore, though, do
No,
they?
they don't. They don't. And so I'm not in business anymore with doing that. But for a time it was actually enforced. And so I created a business, and while I was going to class, I had sewers that were working for me. I was buying raw goods, and actually it was one of my best courses is just starting my own business in college. It was great.
Do you know where the entrepreneurial bug came from?
It's hard to say. My dad always had his own business. My dad was a dentist, and so he had his own business, but I don't consider him a good businessman. He was a great dentist. Probably not the best businessman. I think it just is part of who I am. It's like I have always created my own thing. I really haven't worked. I haven't had very many jobs in my life. So I have created a number of businesses, and my wife and I have actually successfully operated and created businesses together, which is something I'm really proud of, because our last business, we started together, we ran together for 20 years, and we sold it. And so we went through that whole cycle of being a business owner and then selling it as a couple, and we stayed married through the whole process. Crazy.
So you had a variety of businesses
I
then.
have. So after my old business it ended up being a snowboard accessory company, and we manufactured accessories. That expanded into a sewing factory out of Seattle, of which we did all kinds of work for the water ski, wakeboard industries, for ski patrol, for snowboard, for ski. We did a lot of different products for different companies, and China killed us, so we ended up shutting that down, and we moved to Sandpoint, Idaho, which is where I live now. Sandpoint's a beautiful place. Don't tell your friends because everybody else is moving here, but it is. We've got a ski resort. We sit on a big lake. It's amazing, and we moved here not really knowing what we were going to do. We had some experience in the vacation rental industry because we had a home at a ski resort before we were using as a vacation rental. And so we started a vacation rental company here in Sandpoint, and it ended up being the biggest vacation rental company here in the area. So we did that for 20 years. And it was a good business for us. It also, toward the end, was sucking our soul out of our bodies. And we finally said, we have to sell this if we're going to remain intact and healthy. as you talk about men's groups, if it wasn't for men's groups while I was in business, I don't know that I would have survived as long as I did.
Hmm.
It was a big factor for me to widen my capacity so I could actually handle the stress and the conflict that comes with owning a property management company.
It's of upset people, right? Who
Upset
have high
people.
expectations.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. What one statistic I found out, Rocky, that you would love is that most people would rather have internet service than a bed to sleep in.
These days, yeah.
Yeah,
But it's funny because I know some places actually go the opposite way and they advertise as no internet
I think you're going to see
because
a lot more of that.
it's getting forcing the kids off their devices
Yep, yep,
and it's forcing you to go back to living.
yeah. Sometimes that's a parent's last resort, saying it's just not available.
Yeah. Well, then
Yeah.
you don't have to fight.
Last week, my wife and I rented a place up on the Canadian border, kind of a little compound area, and we invited friends up and things like that. And we were on a river, 20 acres, no internet, no cell phone service, very remote, very wild. And we were there for a week, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And it takes a couple days to acclimate. It's kind of amazing how that works.
Letting go of the urge.
Yep. Yeah.
I get it. So when did you get into the coaching side?
Men's groups changed my life. So I have been sitting in men's groups for almost 18 years. And when you run the math, it's interesting because our men's groups meet on Wednesday evenings from 6 till 10 at night. And I've been doing that for a long time. It's changed the way I parent my kids. It's kept me married. Just celebrated my 30th wedding anniversary. And it's enabled me to safely do my own work in front of other men, which has been amazing, right? It's been amazing to share that journey. And so about 5 years into men's work, I quickly realized that I had a knack for working with other men, for facilitating, for holding space, and slowly started to get into doing weekend workshops, things like that for men. And it has just expanded and expanded and expanded. At one point, I ended up going back to school. And I know that you know this about me, but I ended up going through a curriculum for somatic experiencing, which deals with trauma and how trauma is held in the body. So that was a 3-year curriculum that really helped me work with others, both men and women, and working directly with their body and any stored energy or locked energy that might be in their body as a result of adverse situations, whether it's trauma with a capital T or trauma with a small t. It all impacts us.
We'll come back to trauma in a minute.
Okay.
And I want you to explain small t, big T, and all of that. I want to step back to the men's groups because there's a variety of different kinds of men's groups, right? And there's the men's groups, they get together and I guess back in the day they shot pool. Nobody knew what anyone else actually really kind of did or if they had a family or a wife. Nobody really talked about feelings. They all just shot pool and argued about sports or whatever. And then you go online these days and you see these men's groups and it's all these guys, maybe 20s or 30s, bare chested, screaming and yelling and, thumping on their chest or whatever. But what you're kind of talking about, I think, is something different, correct?
Yes. The men's groups that I teach in, that I support, and that I've sat in for a long time, it's very simply a group of men that are together with common agreements, common guidelines and protocols. So we all have an agreement of how we're going to operate in the space. And we just set an enormous amount of safety just to be us, just to be ourselves. It's as simple as that. So if I show up in group and I'm sad, I actually can be sad. I can allow my body to cry. I can allow my body to release. And other men in the group are just going to hold that, right? Part of our agreement is I'm not here to change you. I'm just here to be with you. And that inherent agreement is really important. It's really important. So for men that step into men's group, it's just a place to be real with other men and to explore. And I would say 90% of the work is watching other men do their work. So if I'm sitting in group with you and I watch you do your work, I just resonate. I'm like, oh, that's true for me too. That's true for me. And as I own that and admit that for myself, then it gives me the permission and the courage to reveal that for myself.
This isn't common of most men's group, and it's not very much common of how men communicate, is it?
It's a tricky question because I'm so immersed in this world. It actually is pretty common in my world.
In your world.
But I would say you're right. You're right. That's why one thing that I love about sitting in men's circles is I love working with men that are new to the space, because everything that we do is eye-opening. Everything we do is just like, are you kidding me? This space actually exists. Most people don't know it exists. And until you experience it, it's hard to describe it. It truly is, because it is such a safe, nurturing, open space that most men don't have that in their lives. They just don't.
I was going to ask you women, but if I asked my wife, I would probably say no. So while women are much more open in sharing, I think there's another part where, for lack of a better word, they're not nice to each other. They're not supportive. And it's funny, I've never been in a women's group because I'm not a woman, but I hear these comments in other places of, yeah, we were part of these groups, but it was so catty, so to speak. But I'm sure that there are women's groups that are the same. I think most people assume women are better at this, and us guys haven't had necessarily the space or the freedom or the training to kind of behave that way.
Yeah, I think that's true. So two things as you talk about that, and I'll address the last part first, and that is just around men not having the capacity or the training around this. Our culture, we're going against the undercurrent of our culture, really, because our culture is saying a man needs to be strong, a man needs to be competent, they need to know what they're doing, they need to be in control. And whether we use that exact language or not, there is this expectation of men in our culture to show up in that way. Like, I'm a strong protector. I know what I'm doing. I'm courageous. I'm solid. And that's not a bad thing. Only there's a whole nother side to men that gets suppressed and it's dampened. And so what we do is we balance out the masculine by saying men also have feelings. Men also get angry and don't know how to express their anger in healthy ways. So we practice. Men feel sad, men feel shame, and they don't have an environment where they can safely release those elements. And I know we're going to go into trauma work, but if those pieces of us become suppressed, then it's just stored energy in the body that will scream eventually that it wants to come out. And often it comes out in sideways ways unless we do the training, unless we really talk about what does healthy anger look like. So that's part of what we do with each other. We create a collective environment where we all support each other in having healthy relationships with our emotional body, with our sensory body. The work I do is very body-centered. I want to speak to one other thing, and that is I do believe there's a lot of very functional, healthy women's groups out there. There are. And there's a lot of women that are doing amazing work out there. So as we have men doing their work and women doing their work, it's wonderful. And there are also opportunities for men and women to come together and do work together. So all of that exists. The dynamic, I have seen a lot of women's groups fail. I have seen them fall apart. I've seen that also in men's groups. And not to stereotype or generalize, but one thing that I do see in that sense is that with women they're emotionally available just like that, right? It's like just under the layer of their skin. It's right there. And I also see that a lot of women will only go so far in their vulnerable reveals with each other because of a fear that might be used as a weapon later on, like by somebody, if that makes sense. So and Allison Armstrong, who I just interviewed last week, who is amazing, she talks about this, and she talks about, she's like, women don't take offense, but, two best friends can share things together. And if one person feels violated by the other in any way, then whatever was revealed will be used or could be used as a weapon against each other. And for that reason, it's like, I'll take it to a certain level, but I'm not going to go to the depth. When men feel safe, that dynamic doesn't exist. So what I have experienced, at least, is when men feel safe in a group with each other, they rely on the safety of the space. They will go to a depth that surprises even them, like a depth that they've never gone to before. And that is so healing, and it's so beautiful to watch and to experience.
It is. And that was interesting that you said that. And I think for men, part of the problem, we're of the same generation. When we were boys, maybe not out in the mountains, but, in the city, you were told, oh, I'll give you something to cry about. Or, you were told to suppress everything, and you were taught to not do that, and you were scolded for doing it. And so I think that's where a lot of that training came up with. Today, I mean, my kids are grown, so I'm not firsthand, but it's different, but it's still not healthy. It's different in a different way, but I still don't think it's done in a healthy way, unfortunately.
As you talk about this, I run a number of fatherhood groups, and in one of the most edgy subjects that I bring up in my fatherhood groups is the subject of technology, of how it impacts your children, how it impacts your family, how it impacts the level of presence. And there's a lot of dads that are like, I don't know what to do about this. I don't know what to do. My son is glued to video games and I can't get him off.
So this is the way we learn to parent. What are the people a couple years ahead of me complaining about? How do I prevent that? So how do I prevent the kid from getting glued? Well, A, you could set time limits. B, no devices in the room. Like, we didn't have devices when my kids were young, but no TV in the room, no computers in your room. All of that was in the family room so that it was a shared experience. And because my son was my son, as you know, I love technology, we could program the router to shut him out at whatever time we needed to shut him out until, he finally learned how to deal with that. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I'm going to say this wrong. Be a man, be a father, say no.
It's so funny. When my kids grew up, I realized right away when they were young that commercials on TV were actually the worst things. My kids would be sitting there going, I want that. I want that. I want that. And I looked at my wife and I was like, this has to change. So I canceled the cable and I just told my kids, it went away. It's just gone. And you know what? It never came back. It never came back. So if we ended up watching something with my kids when they were young, it would be a Disney movie or something like that we would watch as a family, and it would be by permission, and they would ask, can we watch a movie together? And like you said, TV was in the family room, so it was a family event. But early on, it just, the warning signs were on the wall. And as a result, I look back and my kids are grown too. In fact, I've got a grandchild on the way. So I'm going to re-experience a lot of this. But what I noticed is that our kids were outside building ski jumps during the winter and hiking up and down and doing tricks, or in the summertime out on their trampoline practicing tricks. They weren't inside. Our kids weren't inside much. And I think those two are related. I really do.
They are. So we did something similar. When our kids were young, for the most part, we only let them watch back then VHS tapes. So there were no commercials. And the things that they watched, everything had a learning theme to it. So it could be fun, but it was fun learning. But the other thing I did, because we taught our kids about money young, because we understood the power of money imprints, we would let them watch the commercial. And I'd be like, you have that toy, don't you? They're like, yeah. I go, is it that much fun? They're like, no. I go, you know what a commercial is? They want your money. Because my kids had money and they had the agency to be able to spend their own money, and they had the lessons. They learned very quickly, commercials are to take my money away. So they did not play those games. And so they were never into name brands, all that stuff. They even sometimes get made fun of for their clothes, and they're like, whatever, we don't care. Like, we're not going to be a sucker to that game. But it was through, again, positive intention and training.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Something that I see even with my kids is this kind of this disillusion around money. I mean, we live in a world of $25 cheeseburgers now, right? We we live in a world. I mean, I was on, looking at real estate. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
Well, no, because so we do have money. It doesn't mean so we told our kids, your parents are rich or poor. It doesn't mean we're not going to do nice things, but we would go out to a wonderful restaurant, drop $250, $300 on dinner. At the end of the dinner, I'm like, here's the bill. It's $300. Was it worth it? And so they got to learn that. My kids tend to eat at home. They know how to cook, and they can go, you know what? We can make better cheeseburgers at home. Like, why am I eating this crap?
Right. Right. Well, I just think it's interesting because the disillusion with money is actually a thing where it's like most of the locals in the community I live in can't afford real estate here.
Mm.
It's what happens in mountain resort towns where people live here. And I bought my home, 22 years ago that I live in. I live in a beautiful home, but I couldn't afford it right now. I couldn't. I just like in today's market, if I walked into Sandpoint, Idaho, I wouldn't be able to afford where I live. And there's a lot of people in those situations. So I would say, if we're going to just weave into a little bit of money, the one thing that takes me out more than anything around money is when I start to compare. If I compare myself to you, to somebody else, to, a bigger, better house, bigger, better car, whatever it is, once I start to compare, anxiety sets in, the need to do more sets in, and then all those the shame statements of I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing it right, or whatever it is. All of that stuff starts to bubble up and kind of pop on the surface for me. And as soon as I stop comparing and I just look around and I say, my needs are met, then all that goes away. But it's so easy to compare. It really is.
It is. And I've learned there's always bigger, better. Doesn't matter what you have. There's always bigger, better. So Get over it. Let's go back to the trauma. So you mentioned big T, little t. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah. So big T trauma is when significant events happen that impact the nervous system to where our systems shut down, we get overloaded. In other words, my capacity, my ability to manage what is happening right now, I can't do it. And so often what happens is the fight and flight responses don't kick in because I'm so overwhelmed. And so the freeze response comes in. Now, when I freeze, it's actually a dissociative defensive response. So I dissociate from myself. There's pieces of me that literally separate, and I distance myself from even me. That is an intelligent way that our bodies react so we can actually survive. So it is a survival response. But what happens in those moments is that the energy does not get released or expressed, and it stays in the body. So after we go to a place of safety, after we feel okay, after the EMT says you're going to be fine, there is no release of that energy. That energy stays in the body. And unlike animals in the wild, and by the way, the somatic experiencing methods all come from ethology, which is looking at how animals release trauma in the wild, right? Of witnessing animals in their natural habitat. So an animal, after it comes to a life-threatening situation and it gets away, the animal will go to where it's safe and will just shake. It will just shake and shake. This is what animals do. Deers do it, gazelles do it, polar bears do it. So as they shake, they're releasing the traumatic imprint on their physiology. And when it's released, they go back. They just go back to grazing. They just go back to life. And it literally is how they survive in the wild. If they stayed in that traumatic state, they wouldn't last 2 days. Humans just don't do that. We don't have a healthy way of releasing these traumatic imprints. And so for a lot of us, they stay in our bodies maybe for decades, right? Until we hire a therapist, until we hire a coach, until we get into men's groups or women's groups, until we get into a safe enough space to allow that traumatic imprint to actually surface and release. And we actually work with that. So that's trauma with a capital T. Trauma with a small t is when there's a lot of little events over time. So it's not just one event, but it's a lot of little events over time that stack up and stack up and stack up and stack up and have a very similar impact on our physiology, but it's very subtle. It's sneaky, right? It's sneaky. It sneaks up on us. But one example is just, being a boy and being criticized all the time by a parent, just over and over and over. And that will have an impact over time. So that's actually trauma with a small t.
And I've noticed for trauma with a small t, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a subjective experience, meaning two people could go through a similar experience and one person turns it into a trauma and another person turns it into, I'll call it an energy or a force to go bigger or to overcome, so to speak. So actually, maybe it's one person doesn't process it and the other person actually processes it in the moment. And so it doesn't become trauma. And maybe that's what it really is.
I think you're right on it. We talk about fight and flight quite a bit. And if somebody is able to actually work their body either through a fight response or through a flight response, then trauma doesn't get embedded in the body. So that energy gets released. So there are those that may suffer from the small t trauma, but they have a healthy workout regime. They jog, they work out, they do things. So the energy continues to be released in their body. But here's one thing that I say, Rocky, and this is important. Just having the release doesn't mean that energy is not going to come back. So having the release is the first part, right? To relax our physiology, and then working in an environment or with somebody that maybe somebody trusts to actually reconcile, or as Peter Levine says, renegotiate that traumatic imprint. Right. So in Everyman, right, we talk a lot about reframing. So we can reframe some of our old experiences, even through childhood, in a way that says, oh, that was actually a healthy response that I had. And I don't need that response in my life today. I needed it then. And so there's an element of, I show a lot of gratitude for having that because it helped me keep me safe, but I don't need it as an adult. So there's a letting go. But without that gratitude, it's difficult.
Going back, we talked about the difference between men and women. And I've noticed boys can fight and they can easily make up. Girls fight, they don't easily make up.
Do you have a question here? I feel like
it's a comment. Am I right? Am I wrong? Is it just,
oh boy,
is that a generality?
I just had this huge fear surge up my system of like, I'm gonna get like hate mail. It's like, I'm so scared to answer that.
You can pass. You go pass. I don't know. That's an interesting point that you have. I'm not aware of it.
Boy, oh boy.
You can throw it back to me.
I think the real answer is I don't know, but what you're touching on, I think, is important. And let me reframe as we talk about reframe. If I
Before
can
you reframe,
yeah.
Let me put in an additional point to that. I think it's because when boys fight, they're physical. And so maybe the energy is released in the fight versus not being as physical. And I know nothing about it. It's a guess.
Okay. So I'm going to reframe and get myself out of trouble. I'm going to get out of this trap. But I am very much interested, and it's a big part of my study today, is around masculine and feminine dynamics. And this isn't gender-based. It's not men and women. It's masculine qualities and feminine qualities. And how, as men, we have both. Women have both. And what is blocking us from actually owning both sides of who we naturally are, right? There are cultural undertones that may suppress the feminine side of men. And it is something that we do in men's groups to really support. Like we'll couple vulnerability and power and say, when you're vulnerable and open, that is a powerful way to express yourself, right? So that's something that we do in men's groups to help with men being more vulnerable and soft and open, where the culture says that's not okay. We don't want that. And, I would say a big part of what at least I do in men's groups and what I support in men's groups is also how to be safe for others. It's even all over my website. It's like once I feel safe in my own body, that's the first step, to feel safe with me and then to offer safety to others. And for men to actually energetically be safe for women, I think is something that culturally, as men, we don't do a very good job with. And I imagine what kind of world we would live in if women felt more safe with men.
Interesting. I have no trap for you with this one.
Okay. Love it.
And it wasn't a trap. It's just an observation of, hey, I've noticed this. I wonder if.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since we've talked about kind of emotional awareness, let's kind of dig into emotional awareness, because I think the way you describe it is different than like EQ, right? Which is kind of different.
Okay.
Your idea of emotional awareness is a different, something different and a different way to view it. So can you expound on that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, when working with men that may have trouble accessing a lot of their emotional body, I often say that with men, anger is the easiest emotion for men to feel, and it's also the hardest for them to express. I work with so many men that are terrified of their own anger, even though it is right under their skin, even though it's right there. Having healthy relationship with our emotional body is what we practice and what we teach. How we get there is through sensations, our sensory body. So I'll often ask, and you've seen me do this, but I'll often ask, what are you feeling in your body? And what I mean by that is, what is happening in your body? Track constriction, track expansion. What parts of my body feel tight and balled up constriction? You can't see me, but kind of like this. And what parts of my body feel open and expansive? And we start there, and then we start adding temperature, maybe texture, maybe giving that part of our body a shape. So we're giving form to the invisible in our sensory body to really give it something we can sink our teeth into. It's like, oh yeah, I'm feeling a lot of constriction in my heart. It's red. It feels tight. It feels like a ball. It feels like a tight ball. It feels like a smooth ball. And we just kind of go with our sensory body. And what happens is that expands into an emotion. So that ends up being a bridge for a lot of men into feeling what emotion is attached to that sensation. I'm feeling my heart and it feels blue and it's coming up into my throat. And all of a sudden a tear will come out of a man's eye and he'll be like, what is that? And it's like, let's just be with it. And whatever your body wants to do, it wants to release. So if it wants to release through tears, are you willing to just allow your body to do that? And before you know it, men are just bawling like crazy. So that is emotional expression. And over time, it becomes an awareness. It's like, I'm feeling sad right now. And so when you ask the question around emotional awareness, where this goes is maybe conflicts or even in family. And it comes definitely into parenting of like, makes me feel really, I'm really sad to hear you say that. And I can feel it in my heart. I can feel it in my throat. And I'm just feeling really sad right now. That alone can change the entire mood of a conversation, right? It's just like, that's just real. It's just real. It's just what is here and what is happening right now.
And I think for men, we're not, I don't know if trained is the right word. We're not exposed to this. We're not, but even if a kid, and I go back to childhood, because even if a kid does that, I think sometimes they get negative responses, or even as an adult male, you may get negative responses to that, or you may have your own internal negative responses to do that. And so you're not comfortable in those types of situations, so to speak.
It's funny. The training that we do, whether it's through my own coaching practice or through Everyman, we're not in the business of creating mushy men. And, that to have somebody that's just a pool of water on the floor being vulnerable in that way doesn't do anybody any good. So there is a level of still really embracing the masculine qualities of strength, of intelligence, of protection. These are valid qualities. And all we're doing is we're balancing those qualities with vulnerability and love and nurturing and openness. And so I think that is often misconstrued around men's groups, is like in men's groups, this is where mushy men get created. And maybe in some men's groups that's true, but certainly not in ours, and that's not the intent. The intent is to balance out so literally all of me can be here in a very open and expressive way.
You've mentioned Everyman a few times, so we really haven't explained what it is, what they do, and how they help. Let's take a minute and do that.
Okay. Everyman is a national men's organization that supports men's emotional awareness and well-being through different channels. So Everyman has online curriculums that you can do from your own living room, a number of in-person retreats that are held all over the country, which I highly recommend. And I have been a facilitator for Everyman for about 6 years, running their retreats. And right now, I act as their director of education and training. So Everyman is a fabulous organization. It does follow a body-centered approach. And like I said, it fills in the missing gap that a lot of men are feeling in their lives. A lot of men feel like there's something missing, but I just can't put my finger on it. And so Everyman is basically an organization that is tasked with filling this gap with something that's very meaningful for men.
And I was going to kind of ask you, like, what is it that Everyman attracts? Like, in other words, what are men going through or feeling that kind of pulls them in? And it sounds like you're saying that there's this missing gap. They feel like something's not there.
Yep. That, and a lot of men going through life transitions that just need support, like need other men that they feel safe with, that they can trust in their lives. So again, I run a fatherhood group through Everyman as well. I do it on my own practice, but I also do a fatherhood group through Everyman. So a lot of dads that maybe are new dads or maybe are going through challenges with their families in some way, they can come into Everyman and just be open about it. Right? Just be open about it and hear from other men that are having similar experiences. But men going through divorce, men going through bankruptcy, whatever it is, if you're going through a major life transition, we all need support. We all need help. And so Everyman is just one outlet for that, for sure.
As men go through the program, I'm sure there becomes a theme of what they say afterwards, in the sense of maybe it's the transformation of the experience or the aha that they kind of go through. Are there a certain theme or a certain thing that kind of comes up as people go through it that they're like?
I think there is. I often hear words like that Everyman has been life-changing for me. I hear language like, I wouldn't still be in this relationship if it wasn't for Everyman. I hear that. But if I was to get to the bottom of it, like to go down even a couple more layers, I would say it in this way. If you were to hold out your hands and create a cup, I'll just do this on camera right here, just to hold a cup, and just to feel how much you can hold for yourself. I've actually asked men this, just show me how much you can hold right now. And men automatically go there. And they'll look at their hands and they'll go, whoa, that looks like a small cup. So our job is to actually build a vessel that can hold more. So if I can help you create a larger vessel so you can hold more in your life, you'll be able to manage more, you'll be able to work with more things, and hopefully you'll be able to hold space for others and help others on their journey too. That's a big part of what we do. It's like after men get their own needs met, we're like, okay, what next? Are you ready to help others, right? Are you ready to reach out and help others? And so, in short form, we help men create a larger container for themselves so they can actually deal with more.
And that's important, the ability to do that. And I think the bigger part is learning to let go. We carry a lot. And I think a lot of times we bury a lot.
Oh,
But
yeah.
just because we bury it doesn't mean we're not carrying it.
Nope.
And I think, it's funny because I'm more aware of watching people these days, and you can just start to see it. Like you can see it. I don't need to talk to someone. I can see someone across the room and you can see what they're doing. You're like, oh, there's somebody carrying a whole ton of crap that he probably doesn't even know about. And it's like, wow, interesting.
I love that. It actually is a prompt that we often use. What is your body saying that you are not?
Hmm.
And so we all communicate through our bodies. We all communicate. Yeah.
So let's talk about this because I've experienced only a handful of people in my life who have the ability or the presence to watch and to see those little micro things and know it. And I think the first time I really experienced it was in my other men's group where one of the guys said, "You're saying X." And I think he said, "But your eyes are saying Y." And he called me out.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
like, "Thank you."
Yep. Yep.
I was appreciative, like, because sometimes you need to be called out. And you're one of those few people that I know that has, I don't know if it's a gift or a training or what it is, but you're very good at being able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. It takes practice. And I would
Yeah, I'm
just
sure it
say,
does.
yeah. And with just a little bit of knowledge of physiology and knowing kind of how emotions impact our bodies or where emotions largely live in our body. To give you an example, fear is going to live higher up, like right in our crest of our shoulders, like right below our neck. Fear is going to live a little bit higher up in our body than shame, right? Shame might be more behind the heart or in the lower gut. So emotions live in the body in different places. And with a little bit of awareness of where emotions lie does help. Like if I see a man that is collapsed, his shoulders are collapsed, his chin is tucked, he's just down, it just sends a signal. And anybody that sees a body in that position is going to receive messages. Like they're going to receive something.
I read the book, I think it was called The Five Tendencies.
Okay.
And in there, it talked about different kinds of men. And I don't remember the exact ones, but like they talked about the alpha male and how they stand. And they talked about this kind of male. And they talked about like they had the body pictures. And they go, this is how their body looks when they fit this personality trait. And again, we can go in and out of those different things at different points. One time you can be this and the other time you're that. And the body is actually reflecting it. And I know there's much more to that. And I know because even in networking and so forth, they teach you, look at their feet. Are their feet pointing towards you or away from you? That's telling you interest, disinterest. Like there's all of these things that we're really never taught about.
I love it.
In learning to pick up the signals from others that are the nonverbal signals that are out there.
One thing that we do, and I think you've experienced this, is we do at the beginning of our in-person retreats, we do a lot of eye contact. And when we do eye contact for a lot of men, a simple 3 to 5 minute exercise is the longest they've ever maintained eye contact with another man in their entire lives. It's incredible. And it's amazing for so many men that I witness how uncomfortable it is, but then they just get drawn in and drawn in and drawn in. And there is such comfort and safety after about 3 minutes that you can just see it. You can see their bodies actually changing.
So you grew up on the West Coast, so you probably didn't experience this, but if you talk to a guy of our age who grew up in New York City, they will tell you, you don't look anybody in the eye because you look somebody in the eye, you might get killed. And I grew up with that culture of you don't do that. And it's funny because I never realized it, but now when you hear people speak like and talking about those days, that's what they talk about all the time. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize what an imprint that kind of made.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the
And it
behavior
goes way back. It goes even further back where two men looking each other in the eye was actually a sign of I want to fight you. I mean, it goes way back. And so that was just culturally what happened. If I'm going to look you in the eye, because it's a very vulnerable thing. It's a very vulnerable thing to look another man in the eye. Some people call the eyes the gateways to the soul. And so as have eye contact and we have consistent eye contact where, left eye to left eye, we're not blinking, we're just really with each other. It can be a very intimate experience and very edgy to have, but so healing.
Is there anything we should have talked about that we didn't get a chance to?
I don't know. I just really love this conversation. I would say one thing around trauma work and the work that we do in men's groups. And just to give it an easy headline, a lot of what we do is we complete what was left incomplete in our past. It's an easy way to frame it, and it's actually a good description because we have the ability to actually complete these incompletions where maybe we just stopped growing at that time of our life, or we stopped maturing at that time of our life. And that gap is really holding us back from being our best selves.
And that makes a lot of sense. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
I live where I choose to live, and I surround myself with people that I choose openly. So,
And we do have that choice.
We do have that choice. Some people don't believe it.
Oh, I know that.
Or some people have never recognized that choice, but I have. And so that is my definition of success. My definition to an abundant life is I live where I choose and I surround myself with people that I choose.
And I am shocked at how many people feel stuck where they are and they don't see a way out, unfortunately. Yes. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Ooh, that's a good one. That didn't need to hold my anger for so long. Yeah. That my anger in my younger years came out in rebellion and breaking the law and doing things that I wasn't supposed to. And I was just really angry. And that's how I dealt with it. And if I would have had the right guidance, if I would have had the right mentor, I could have released anger in such a more productive way. It's crazy. And I went through the school of hard knocks for a number of years. Yeah.
You forgot to mention that in your growing up story.
Oh, yeah. We all have it. I definitely had it.
And it's funny because, now I look back, I'm like, why are so many young guys angry? And there's a variety of things. And I think part of it is just learning to process through it.
Yes.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Trust your heart, because an 18-year-old's mind is all over the board. Trust your heart.
Yeah, I'm going to struggle with this one because too many raging hormones and a little too wild a heart, maybe. So I would say more so into think and make sure it's your heart. How is that?
It's interesting because I'll say this, the heart knows truth. And if I trust my heart and I ask it the right questions, maybe it's what college do I need to go to? What is the next step of my life? Like, what is the right thing? If I ask my heart those questions, I actually will get an answer. If I ask my head those questions, it will give me multiple answers, a lot of which conflict with each other. So it's not just about sex, it is about life. So yeah, trust your heart. Ask your heart the right questions.
There you go. If people would like to learn more about you and Everyman, best way for them to do that?
Yeah, if you're curious about my practice, go to my website. It's very simple. It's just bradgolphenee.com. And my last name is tricky. It's Golphenee. So bradgolphenee.com. I also have a website that sinks into it, which is just bodycenteredlearning.com, if that's easier to remember. And on my website, it shows all about my work and what I do and my theory, my practice, and hopefully that's helpful. There's also a place to sign up for a free 30-minute consultation if anybody is interested. So that's my website. And then everyman.com. And Everyman is spelled different. It's EVRYMAN. And so Everyman is the national men's organization that I am a part of. And we hold in-person retreats and we have online curriculums and it's easy to get involved. So go to everyman.com and just browse, just have fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Rocky, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out this unedited video of the Richer Soul podcast. You can find the full episode along with all the back episodes at richersoul.com. This podcast is brought to you by Profit Comes First, where we help business owners to have a more profitable and growing business so they can live the life of their dreams. Check that out as well wherever you listen to all this content.